Letters from Russia, 1919, by P.D. Ouspensky. While revolution was spreading throughout Russia and the Bolsheviks were establishing their reign of terror, Ouspensky was living in conditions of great danger and hardship in various temporary quarters in South Russia. From 1917 to 1919, he and those around him were completely cut off from the outside world, unable to receive or send news even as far as the next town, constantly on the alert to avoid being picked up and murdered by the Bolsheviks. In 1919, Ouspensky, who was a professional journalist, found a means to send a series of articles to the New Age, which, under the skillful editorship of A.R. Orage, was the leading literary, artistic, and cultural weekly paper published in England. These letters from Russia, 1919, give a detached but horrific description of the total breakdown of public order in Russia and show that Ouspensky foresaw with unusual clarity the inevitability of the tyranny described by Solzhenitsyn some 50 years later. Letter 1, July 25th, 1919. Ouspensky writes, "It is now 2 years since I last saw the New Age, and I do not know what is being said and thought and written in England and what you know. I can only guess. During this period, we here have lived through so many marvels that I honestly pity everybody who has not been here, everybody who is living in the old way, everybody who is ignorant of what we know now. You do not even know the significance of the words living in the old way. You have not the necessary perspective, and you cannot get away from yourselves and look at yourselves from another point of view. But we did so long ago. To understand what living in the old way means, you would need to be here in Russia and to hear people saying, and yourself too from time to time, 'Shall we ever live again in the old way?' For you, this phrase is written in a quite unintelligible language. Do not try to understand it. You will surely begin to think that it is something to do with the reestablishment of the old regime or the oppression of the working classes and so on. But in actual fact, it means something very simple. It means, for example, when shall we be able to buy shoe leather again, or shaving soap, or a box of matches? But no, it is no use. I feel sure you will not understand me. You are used to considering questions on a much wider basis. The question of the box of matches will seem to you excessively trivial and uninteresting. I see perfectly clear that we have lost utterly and forever the ability to understand one another. A lady of my acquaintance, whose husband has been abroad all this time, while she has been here with her little son, said to me recently, quote, "I'm frightened of the moment when my husband and I will meet again. He won't understand. Perhaps he will ask me why Alex hasn't been learning English, and I shall not know what to say. Indeed, we shall both of us be silent the whole time. Every trifle will create a gulf between us. In the old days, we understood one another very well, but now we shall be distant from each other, strangers." End quote. I understood. We know too much to be able to speak to you on equal terms. We know the true relation of history and words to facts. We know what such words as civilization and culture mean. We know what revolution means, and a socialist state, and winter, and bread, and stove, and soap, and many, many more of the same kind. You have no sort of idea of them. We know that war, and politics, and economic life, and a word, all those things about which one reads in the papers, in which those big, two-dimensional creatures called nations and states live and move and have their being. We know that all this is one thing, but that the life of individual men and women is quite another thing, having no points of contact with the former, except when it does not allow the latter to live. We know now that the whole life of individual men and women is a struggle against these big creatures. We are able to understand without difficulty that a nation is a creature standing on a far lower stage of development than individual men and women. It is about on the level of zoophytes, slowly moving in one direction or the other and consuming one another. Thank heavens we are now beginning to perceive that we are not so. I am not preparing to set out an esoteric philosophy for your attention, not in the least. Life, as we see it here, shows us that it is not at all what we used to think, and that in any case we must not regard it as a single whole. A fight is going on within it of blind, struggling forces, and through this fight we are somehow able to steer a course. If we begin in what is left of Russia today to examine this life of the great forces, we observe primarily that everything in it acts according to one general rule, which I may call the law of opposite aims and results. In other words, everything leads to results that are contrary to what people intend to bring about and towards which they strive. The people who started the war with Germany and pointed out the necessity of destroying Germany and militarism and so on did not in the least intend to overthrow the monarchy in Russia and create the revolution. And men who dreamed of the revolution and liberty and so on did not in the least expect to bring in the epoch that Kerensky's speeches. Enough of words, the time to come is come to act. And Kerensky did not intend to create the conditions in which Bolshevism could develop and ripen so well. And the Bolsheviks did not propose to live in a state of perpetual war and to introduce into Russia what is in actual fact the dictatorship of the criminal element. In precisely the same way, the people who are now struggling to bring about the recreation of a great, united, indivisible, and so on Russia are gathering results very little resembling what they are striving for. And, on the other hand, their opponents, not the Bolsheviks, but those others who favor the idea of a federation of separate and independent states instead of a single Russia, are destroying every chance of such a division and are strengthening the idea of unity. This side of our own life is very curious and characteristic of the point of view of this same law. The idea of self-governing units is in itself very alluring. The evils of centralization have long been demonstrated, but none of the people who used to examine in theory the status of small self-governing units can ever have thought that the first coming to life of such organizations would begin with their all fighting with one another. But this is what happens. Before anything else is even thought of, the frontiers are closed, the custom houses are established, passage through their territories is made difficult, and is likewise the taking in or out of articles. And then the local politicians start making speeches about the wicked schemes and general depravity of the neighboring state, about the necessity of getting rid of its evil influence upon local conditions, etc., etc. And at once the dull rattling of weapons begins in one direction or the other. The Russia of today presents an interesting picture. The travel from Menevroye Vody to Rostov and then to Novorossiysk. You pass through 4 states, each with different laws, different prices, different sorts of police, united only by a single common quality, namely that without bribes, and such enormous bribes as were never even dreamed of in the old Russia, you cannot go far. For example, for the railway ticket that costs 100 rubles, you have to pay a bribe of 200 or 300 or even 500 rubles. Of course, this is not the case always or everywhere, but wherever there are any prohibitions, bribes are essential. If you want something more important than a railway ticket, you have to pay correspondingly more. Everyone knows about it, everyone talks about it, and everyone accepts it as permissible and inevitable. You have understood that it is a point of contact between historical events and the life of individual men and women. If you want to see what Russia now is really like, try to imagine the following happening in England. Then you will now see how much more interesting and varied our life is than yours. The scene in Rostov Station about a month ago. The night train is about to leave. There are no tickets to be had. This means that you must pay a porter 140 or more rubles for a third-class ticket costing 40 rubles. For this, you get a ticket for the numbered seat, but when the passengers get into the train, it appears that for every seat, 4 tickets have been sold. Then even we begin to be irritated. An official appears, something like an old-time gendarme, and invites anyone who wishes to remain behind and make a complaint. When he is given the number of the porter who sold the tickets and told to fetch the station master and the booking clerk, he merely smiles at the naivete of the questions and says that these gentlemen are busy. And now, if we turn to the life of individuals and see how it develops points of contact with history, we observe that the preeminent subject of conversation is the strangeness of our all being alive. Not all, of course, but we who survive, and the reflection that we may all perhaps be alive for a little while longer. The next favorite subject is the high price of everything, generally how much such and such a thing costs. The prices of all products and necessities have risen by 20, 50, and 100 or 600 times. Workmen's wages have risen 20, 50, or even 100 times, but the salary of an ordinary brain worker, a teacher, a journalist, or a doctor, has risen in the best cases by no more than 3 times. And very often has not risen at all, but has actually decreased. If you earn 2,000 rubles a month, you are considered to be doing well, but often one meets with earnings of 1,800 or 600 rubles. But the cheapest pair of boots costs 900 rubles, a pound of tea 150 rubles, a bottle of wine 60 rubles, and so on. On the whole, you may reckon a ruble now as worth a pre-war kopeck, i.e., its 100th part. You ask how it is possible to live under such conditions, and this is the most occult aspect of the whole question. I will answer for myself. I personally am still alive, only because my boots and trousers and other articles of clothing, all old campaigners, are still holding together. When they end their existence, I shall evidently end mine. In general, to realize these prices, you must imagine that everything in England has grown correspondingly. Boots at 90 pounds, a suit 400, a pound of sugar 10 pounds, and that your income remains precisely what it was before. Then you will understand our Russian life today. You must understand, too, the psychological side of these prices. In some people, they create panic. In others, complete prostration. In others, again, a kind of mystic fatalism. In primitive people, they evoke a thirst for profits, because never in any place were profits made so simply and easily as now in Russia. The prices are different in every place. To carry something from one town to another is to make money. Prices rise by leaps and bounds. At Ekaterinodar, which is considered the cheapest place in Russia today, the price of bread doubled itself in a fortnight, rising from 1.5 rubles a pound to 3 and even 3.5. Everybody realizes that this is the result of some big deal. Someone is putting millions into his pocket, but since it is not exactly clear who, in this particular case, is doing it, everybody prefers to be silent. But the masses rush to take part in the general looting, the fascination of which excites their imagination. For a bag of flour or of bread, a basket of eggs, or a jar of butter may bring them a whole fortune as reckoned in the old values. So the trains and stations are crowded with people with bags and baskets. They carry typhus and cholera and regulate commercial relations between the states of Don and Tarik and Kuban. This speculation is one of the most prominent symptoms of our life. It began in the first year of the war and has grown to such an extent that we cannot exist without it. When a war upon speculation is declared, we all begin to groan and cry out. For it means that some article of necessity, milk or butter or eggs, will temporarily disappear altogether from the market, and when afterwards it comes back, it will cost 3 or 4 times what it cost before. In nothing has the law of opposite aims and results appeared more clearly than in the war of profiteering. Nothing seems to touch an ordinary inhabitant who does not take part in speculation so seriously as the war with it. You will ask what else we live for. Russia was once famous for its literature and its art. Yes, but that all disappeared long ago. Literature, art, and science have all been abolished by the Bolsheviks, and they remain abolished. Ah, but I forgot. The Bolsheviks, I said. I quite forgot that you do not know what this word means. Even if you have seen Bolsheviks in England, believe me, they are not the real thing. In my next letter, I hope to tell you what Bolsheviks are.